All right, everyone, get ready for this, because today we are diving headfirst into a mystery that's been going on for decades.
A mystery with real weight to it.
Yeah, literally. We're
Yeah.
talking about tons and tons of gold.
Enough to make a dragon jealous. Maybe even enough to make Smog jealous.
Well, maybe not quite that much gold, but we're talking about the U.S. gold reserves.
Supposedly over 8,000 tons of it.
The big question is, does the U.S. actually have all that gold it claims?
You know, it's a question that has been debated back and forth for years and years and years, it feels like.
And it's a debate that gets pretty heated sometimes.
Oh, yeah, with good reason. I mean, we're talking about a national treasure here.
And a global one, too.
Right. This isn't just about the U.S., you see. If something were amiss with the U.S. gold reserves, it would send shockwaves through the entire world economy.
So in this deep dive, we're really trying to get to the bottom of this. We're looking at the history, the evidence, and the theories to see what holds weight.
And we're going to be taking a close look at a YouTube video by Andre Geek.
Boldly titled, I might add, America's Missing Gold, the Biggest Cover-Up in History.
Now, that title certainly grabs your attention.
It does. So let's jump right into one of the more startling claims in Jeek's video.
The one about banks airlifting thousands of gold bars from London to New York?
That's the one. What's the deal with that? Does this mean the U.S. is running low on gold and they're trying to, like, restock the shelves in Fort Knox?
Well, not quite. It's not as simple as that.
Oh, I figured there had to be more to the story.
There is. So what we're seeing here is something called arbitrage.
Arbitrage. Now, that's a fancy financial term.
It is, but it's actually a pretty simple concept.
Break it down for us.
Sure. So arbitrage is basically just exploiting price differences in different markets. In this case, we're talking about the gold market. So banks like JP Morgan and HSBC, they're buying gold in London where the price is a bit lower, and then they're shipping it to New York where they can sell it at a slightly higher price.
So it's like a high-stakes version of buy low, sell high.
Exactly. Only instead of stocks, we're talking about gold bars.
Gold bars being flown across the Atlantic, that's got to be expensive.
It is, but the profits they're making are huge, more than enough to cover the cost of shipping.
I guess when you're dealing with gold, the stakes are always high.
That's true. But, you know, the fact that this is happening on such a large scale, it has definitely raised eyebrows.
I bet. I mean, if I saw planes full of gold bars flying overhead, I'd start asking questions too.
Yeah, and some people see this as evidence that something's fishy, that maybe the U.S. is desperately trying to replenish its gold reserves.
But isn't it also possible that this is just, good business, banks being banks?
It's definitely possible. It's important to remember that this is just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay, fair enough. But it's a pretty intriguing piece, don't you think?
For sure. But let's take a step back for a moment, okay? Before we get too deep into this, let's try to understand how the U.S. managed to amass this massive gold reserve in the first place.
Yeah, good point. It's not like they just stumbled upon a giant gold mine, right?
No giant gold mine, but a combination of events, shall we say.
Events and maybe some clever or maybe not so clever economic policies along the way.
We have to go back, way back to the Great Depression, a time of immense economic turmoil and uncertainty, as you might imagine.
The 1930s.
Yeah, think breadlines, unemployment, and people losing faith in the financial system.
Not exactly a happy time.
Not at all. And it's during this period that we encounter one of the most pivotal moments in U.S. gold history.
Go on, this is getting interesting.
It's called Executive Order 6102, signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself.
Executive Order 6102, what was that all about?
Well, imagine this, the government telling you that you could no longer own gold.
Wait, what? Like making it illegal to own gold?
Exactly. You had to turn in your gold for paper money. That was the deal.
Wow, that must have been a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Oh, you can bet there was resistance. A lot of people saw gold as the ultimate safe haven, especially during such turbulent times.
I can imagine.
But despite the pushback, this order, well, it resulted in a massive influx of gold into the U.S. Treasury.
So this is how they started building that legendary hoard we're talking about today.
A big part of it, yes. But the story doesn't end there. As World War II approached, you had nations across Europe, fearing invasion, sending their own gold reserves to the U.S. for safekeeping.
They saw the U.S. as the safest place in the world.
At the time, pretty much, yeah. So you had all this gold flowing into the U.S., adding to its already growing stockpile. And to house this treasure, this enormous amount of gold, they built Fort Knox.
Fort Knox, the legendary vault, the most secure place on Earth, or so they say.
The very name conjures up images of impenetrable walls and maybe even a dragon or two guarding the gold.
Oh, definitely a dragon or two. But the thing about Fort Knox is that it's shrouded in secrecy, isn't it?
That's right, and that lack of transparency is precisely what fuels a lot of the speculation and the theories.
Because we've got this iconic fortress shrouded in secrecy, holding unimaginable wealth, and naturally, the rumors start to fly.
Oh, the rumors. Are the rumors true? Is the gold really there? If it is there, is it all American gold? Or does some of it belong to other countries? Or maybe, just maybe, it's not even gold at all.
Whoa, wait a minute, what do you mean not even gold?
Well, some people speculate, and it's a pretty wild theory, that maybe, just maybe, the gold at Fort Knox is actually tungsten.
Tungsten, like the metal they use in light bulbs.
The very same, but cleverly disguised to look like gold.
Okay, now that is a conspiracy theory if I've ever heard one.
It is, but you see, the fact that people are even entertaining such outlandish ideas tells you something about the level of distrust surrounding this whole issue.
Because if there were more transparency, if we actually knew what was going on inside Fort Knox, there wouldn't be so much room for speculation, right?
Exactly. And that brings us to another key point, you see. There hasn't been a full, independent public audit of Fort Knox in decades.
Wait, seriously? No one has actually gone in there and counted all the gold bars.
Well, there have been audits, sort of. Back in 1953, there was one, but it was more of a staged event than a rigorous inspection.
Stage, like they were just putting on a show for the cameras.
Pretty much, yeah. And while there have been other audits since then, they haven't been comprehensive.
So no one has actually verified that all 8,000 tons of gold are actually there.
Not publicly, no.
That's a bit concerning, isn't it?
It is, and that lack of transparency, that's precisely what Andrei Geek is focusing on in his video. He argues that the government's reluctance to conduct a truly independent audit raises serious questions.
So we've established that there's a lot we don't know about what's going on inside Fort Knox. But before we delve deeper into those mysteries, I want to take a step back.
Okay, what's on your mind?
Let's talk about why this even matters. I mean, the dollar isn't backed by gold anymore, right? So why all the fuss about these gold reserves?
That's a great question, and it's one that a lot of people ask. So even though we're no longer on the gold standard, gold still holds immense value.
Why is that? Is it just because it's shiny and pretty?
Well, it's definitely shiny and pretty, but there's more to it than that. Gold is seen as a hedge against inflation and economic uncertainty.
Okay, so it's like a financial safety net, even if it's not directly propping up the dollar.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting. You see, the official value of the U.S. gold reserves, it's based on a price that was set back in the 1970s, which is what, like $42.22 per ounce?
$42.22 an ounce. That seems awfully low.
It is. Gold is worth significantly more than that today. If you valued it at today's market prices, the U.S. gold reserves would be worth trillions.
Trillions, with a T.
A T, yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of money. So
Yeah.
why not just revalue the gold? Wouldn't that solve a lot of problems? Maybe even help pay down the national debt?
Well, it's not that simple. There are a lot of factors to consider. Suddenly revaluing your gold by trillions of dollars, that would send shockwaves through the global financial system. It could potentially destabilize the entire thing.
Okay, I get it. There are risks involved. But it's still strange, isn't it? Why is the U.S. seemingly content to just sit on this massive undervalued asset?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There has to be a reason, and that reason is what we're trying to uncover in this deep dive.
Okay, so we've got a history of gold accumulation, a secretive fortress, questionable audits, and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Quite the mystery.
It is. Where do we go from here? What does Jeek point to in his video that might suggest that something is amiss with the U.S. gold?
Well, let's get into that. He has some very interesting points that I think you will want to hear about.
Can't wait to hear them. Well, one of the key things Jeek brings up is that whole lack of transparency thing with the Fort Knox audits.
He argues that the government just won't do a truly independent public audit, and that is a huge red flag.
Yeah, it does make you wonder, right? Like, what are they trying to hide?
And he's not the only one saying this. Even folks like Ron Paul.
Wait, Ron Paul?
Yeah.
Like the former congressman, the sound money guy?
Yeah, him. He's been pretty vocal about his doubts about the gold in Fort Knox, and it's not just, folks on the fringes.
So even people we think of as, like, serious economic thinkers are raising these concerns.
It's not just conspiracy theorists, yeah. There are some legit concerns out there from all sorts of different perspectives.
Okay, so let's say, hypothetically speaking, some or all of the U.S. gold was missing.
Hypothetically.
Yeah, hypothetically, what kind of impact would that have? Like, paint me a picture. What happens?
Well, first off, the consequences would be I mean, pretty bad.
Bad for the U.S., bad for the world.
Both, yeah. The dollar, being the world's reserve currency.
Yeah, the big one. Everyone uses it.
Everyone uses it. Well, it would probably tank, like completely plummet in value.
So inflation goes through the roof.
Inflation would go crazy.
And what about our savings? I mean, those would be worth, like, what, a fraction of what they are now?
Exactly. It would be like watching your savings just vanish overnight.
And we're talking about a potential global financial meltdown, right? Like, things would get chaotic pretty quickly.
Definitely. It wouldn't just be about the U.S. economy. It would be a global economic earthquake.
And wouldn't that also, like, damage the U.S.'s standing in the world? Like, you can't even keep track of your own gold?
Oh, yeah. Big time. The U.S.'s credibility on the world stage would be shot.
Other countries would probably be like, see, we told you so.
Totally. It could even lead to, like, a shift in global power dynamics.
Wow, that's a pretty bleak scenario.
Yeah.
But let's flip the script for a second.
Okay, flip it.
Let's say the government is telling the truth and all the gold is accounted for. Why so much secrecy? Like, why not just open the doors of Fort Knox and be like, see, it's all here?
It's the million-dollar question.
Why all the cloak and dagger stuff?
Well, the official line is national security. They say revealing too much about Fort Knox's security measures would make it a target.
Yeah, but it just seems like a convenient excuse, especially given the whole audit situation or a lack thereof.
Yeah, it's tough to not be at least a little skeptical.
So we've got the government saying, trust us, it's all good, but they won't show us the goods.
It's like this big game of trust, but they're not playing fair.
So what does Jeek suggest we do about this whole mess?
He's a big proponent of a full, independent, transparent audit.
Like, count every single bar, weigh it, test it, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. And broadcast it live for the world to see.
Now, that would be must-see TV.
Talk about transparency. But you think the government would ever go for that?
I'm not so sure. They've been pretty resistant to the whole public audit thing.
Yeah, they keep saying it's a security risk, logistical nightmare, all that.
It feels like we're at an impasse then.
We might be. On one hand, the government says everything's fine, but then they won't provide the kind of proof that would actually put people's minds at ease.
It's like they want us to trust them, but they're not giving us a good reason to.
Exactly. That's the big problem here, that lack of trust.
So are we doomed to just wonder forever about this? Is there any way to actually get to the bottom of this?
Well, maybe a full-blown public audit isn't on the table, but there might be other ways to investigate.
Like what? Hire a private detective. Send in a crack team of archaeologists.
Ha. Well, maybe not that dramatic. But, independent researchers, journalists, they could keep digging, analyze data, maybe even follow the gold shipments, talk to experts.
Like a real-life treasure hunt.
Maybe, but the treasure is the truth in this case.
And speaking of treasure, I got to ask you about one of the more wild theories out there. The tungsten theory.
Oh, yeah, the tungsten theory.
The idea that the gold at Fort Knox has been secretly swapped out with tungsten.
Like a big magic trick.
It sounds crazy, right? Like something out of a movie.
It does sound far-fetched, but I think it really highlights the deep distrust that's out there.
Like people are so used to governments pulling the wool over their eyes that they're willing to believe almost anything.
That's a good point. Trust, once it's gone, is hard to get back.
So getting back to Jeek's video, does he offer any actual proof that the gold is missing, or is it just all speculation?
Well, he relies a lot on circumstantial evidence and historical precedents, like when governments have been caught lying about their gold before.
Yeah, like that whole German gold thing back in the 50s.
Exactly. That's a prime example of how governments aren't always straight shooters when it comes to gold.
But is there any hard proof that something similar is happening in the U.S.?
It's hard to say for sure. Proving a negative is always tricky.
No smoking gun, huh?
Not that we know of, but he does point to some strange things going on in the gold market.
Like what?
Well, for instance, the U.S. hasn't been leasing out its gold, even when offered really good deals.
That is weird. Most countries lease out their gold all the time, don't they?
Yeah, it's a way to generate revenue. But the U.S. has been really hesitant to do that.
Makes you wonder if they even have the gold to lease in the first place.
Right. It's like saying you're a millionaire but refusing to spend any money.
Maybe they're just really good at saving.
Maybe, but I think this whole discussion really highlights something important.
Something bigger than just the gold itself.
Yeah, it's about trust, transparency, and how our entire financial system works. If people lose faith in those systems, well, things can unravel pretty quickly.
It's like that saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Yeah, at some point, people stop believing the stories they're being told.
It's a good reminder that we shouldn't just blindly accept what we're told, especially when it comes to something as important as, the national treasure.
You got to ask questions, demand evidence, hold those in power accountable.
Well said. We've definitely uncovered a lot in this deep dive, but it seems like we still have more questions than answers.
It's a mystery that might never be fully solved.
But at least we're asking the right questions.
I think so. And maybe that's the most important thing.
All right, so we've talked about the history of America's gold, looked at the evidence Jeek presents, and considered what would happen if the gold was actually gone.
It's been quite the ride.
It has, and I think it's time to move on to the final part of our deep dive.
Where we'll get into some even bigger questions about our financial system and what this whole thing means for the future.
That sounds pretty intense.
It is, but it's important stuff.
Well, then let's do it. Let's dive in. So we spent quite a bit of time now digging into this whole mystery surrounding America's gold.
A lot of twists and turns.
Yeah, we've looked at the history, all the theories, and what could happen if the gold was,
Gone, vanished.
poof. But I want to zoom out for a minute. What does this whole thing tell us about, our financial system right now?
It shows you there are definitely, vulnerabilities there.
Vulnerabilities? Like what?
I mean, the fact that such a big, important asset.
We're talking thousands of tons of gold.
Right. Thousands of tons of gold. And it's basically hidden away, shrouded in secrecy.
Super secretive.
It makes you wonder, right? If everything is legit, why not just be upfront about it?
Transparency, that's what G keeps saying.
He says it's not just about, being shady. It could actually be dangerous.
Dangerous. How so?
Well, if you've got all this secrecy and mystery, it breeds distrust.
People start thinking the worst.
And that can really mess with the whole system.
Like a domino effect.
Yeah, and we've seen that before, like bank runs.
When everyone panics and tries to take their money out all at once.
Exactly. But now it's not just about banks.
We've got crypto now.
Crypto, yeah, and all these other new financial systems popping up.
Decentralize all that.
So if people lose faith in the traditional stuff, they've got other options.
So this whole gold thing, it's like maybe it's not just about gold,
Maybe it's a sign of something bigger, like a shift in how people think about money.
Like a paradigm shift.
Maybe people are starting to really question who's in control,
Questioning the powers that be.
Yeah, like central banks, governments, all that.
They want more say in what happens to their money.
More transparency, more control.
Makes sense. After all, we've seen what can happen when those in charge make decisions that, don't benefit everyone.
It can get messy.
So what do we do? How do we fix this? Is a public audit, like Cheek wants? Is that the only way?
A public audit would definitely help, but let's be real, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, too much resistance.
But the government could at least, give us more info.
Instead of just radio silence.
More details on the audits, even if they can't reveal everything.
So strike a balance between, security and transparency.
Right. Enough to reassure people, but not enough to compromise anything.
It's not just on the government either, right?
We all have a part to play.
What can we do?
Be informed, think critically, don't just take things at face value.
Don't just believe everything you hear.
Exactly. Ask questions, do your own research.
Hold those in power accountable.
Yeah, demand more transparency, better systems.
It's easy to feel helpless with stuff like this. What can one person really do?
The change has to start somewhere.
Individual action, awareness, all that.
It all adds up.
So even if this whole gold mystery is never solved, maybe the fact that we're talking about it,
Having this conversation.
that's a win in itself.
Definitely. It's forcing us to think about trust, transparency, and the whole foundation of our financial system.
Deep stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today.
From wondering if the gold is even there to questioning, the whole system.
Mind-blowing. What a journey.
But we didn't get all the answers, did we?
Nope. But I think we got some good questions.
And that's important.
So to everyone listening, keep that curiosity going. Do your own digging. And don't be afraid to question things.
Especially when it comes to something as important as, the national treasure.
Well said.
Yeah.
And remember, the next time you see something made of gold,
A gold bar, a coin, even a piece of jewelry.
think about where it came from, its history, all the stories it could tell.
It might make you see gold in a whole new light.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, stay curious and keep those questions coming.